Welcome everyone to today's special audio digest. For the next few minutes, we'll explore one of the most complex and tragic conflicts of our time, the Syrian crisis. From its historical roots to its devastating war, we will uncover the layers that have shaped the country's current situation. This is not just a geopolitical event, but a human tragedy that has affected millions. As we go through Syria's story, we will also touch the roles played by global powers and discuss India's perspective on this conflict. So sit back, relax, and join me as we unravel the history and present-day realities of the Syrian crisis. Syria's history stretches back thousands of years, long before the modern borders were drawn. Ancient Syria was a crossroads for great civilizations. From the early city-states of Ebla and Mari to the great empires of the Assyrians and Romans, Syria was a land of cultural exchange, art, and intellectual achievement. Cities like Damascus and Aleppo are among the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. But Syria's modern identity didn't emerge until much later. In the 20th century, after the Ottoman Empire fell post-World War I, Syria was placed under French mandate, a period that sowed the seeds of future unrest. In 1946, after years of rebellion and nationalistic movements, Syria finally gained independence. But the early years of its independence were unstable, marked by coups and political chaos. The real shaping of modern Syria came in 1970 with the rise of Hafez al-Assad. Hafez, a former Air Force pilot, took control of the country through a military coup. His rule marked the beginning of the Assad dynasty, one of the most enduring regimes in the region. Hafez, like many strongmen, consolidated power by creating a highly centralized state, controlled by the military and intelligence agencies. Hafez's rule was tough, marked by the suppression of opposition. The most infamous episode was the Hama massacre of 1982, when thousands of Syrians were killed after a Muslim Brotherhood-led rebellion was crushed. Despite the brutality, Hafez maintained stability and a strong grip on power. His rule helped Syria maintain its role as a central player in Middle Eastern geopolitics. When Hafez died in 2000, his son Bashar al-Assad succeeded him, promising to be a reformer. But this was not to be. While Bashar initially presented himself as more open to reforms, his government continued the authoritarian rule, maintaining tight control over the country's politics and media. Everything changed in 2011. The Arab Spring, a wave of uprisings and protests across the Arab world, reached Syria. People were tired of corruption, unemployment, and lack of political freedom. It began as a peaceful protest in Daraa against the government's brutal treatment of children who had written anti-government graffiti. What followed was a nationwide wave of demonstrations demanding reforms. But instead of negotiating, the Assad regime responded with violence. The protests were met with gunfire and the government escalated the repression. This harsh response only fueled the anger of the people, and soon the situation spiraled out of control. The initial protests turned into an armed rebellion and the country descended into full-scale civil war. By 2012, Syria was fractured into multiple regions controlled by different rebel groups. The situation became more complex with the involvement of outside powers, each with their own interests in the country. In 2014, a new force entered the fray: the rise of ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. They changed the dynamics of the conflict. ISIS declared a self-styled caliphate in parts of Syria and Iraq, aiming to establish an Islamic state ruled by strict interpretations of Sharia law. The brutality of ISIS shocked the world. Their rise was a direct result of the chaos in Syria, and they quickly took control of key cities including Raqqa. The global community, led by the United States and its friends, began to intervene. The US focused on fighting ISIS, while at the same time, Russia and Iran, staunch allies of Assad, continued their support for the Syrian government. This created a tense, multi-layered conflict with local, regional and international actors all involved. The global community had conflicting interests. The US and European powers sought to weaken Assad's regime, while Russia and Iran viewed Assad as a critical ally. Meanwhile, Turkey, worried about Kurdish separatism, intervened in the north. Syria had become a battleground for global powers, and the situation seemed increasingly hopeless. As the war raged on, the humanitarian crisis became one of the worst in the modern era. By 2016, half of Syria's population, around 12 million people, had been displaced. Cities like Aleppo, once thriving centers of the culture and commerce, were reduced to rubble. The scale of suffering was unimaginable. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. Chemical weapons attacks, the use of barrel bombs, and sieges caused unimaginable pain. The UN reported that millions were in desperate need of food, water, and medical aid. Syria's health and education systems were destroyed, and the economy was in tatters. The war's impact extended beyond Syria's borders, with millions of refugees flooding into neighboring countries like Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. Europe also saw waves of refugees seeking asylum, leading to a crisis in the European Union. The Syrian conflict became a proxy war, with global powers vying for influence. Under Vladimir Putin, Russia has become a staunch ally of the Assad regime. Russia's involvement was primarily about maintaining its military presence in the Mediterranean and protecting its interests in Syria. Russian airstrikes and support were crucial in turning the tide in favor of Assad. Iran has provided significant support to Assad, sending troops and military equipment to strengthen his government. Iran views Syria as a critical ally in its regional influence, particularly as it seeks to strengthen the Shia axis in the Middle East. United States initially supported the Syrian opposition and later focused on defeating ISIS. However, American involvement complicated the situation, especially as it worked with Kurdish forces, which Turkey viewed as a threat to its own territorial integrity. Turkey has been involved in the conflict, supporting certain rebel factions and combating Kurdish forces that it views as a threat. Turkish forces have been involved in northern Syria, attempting to push back Kurdish militants and establish a safe zone. This complicated web of foreign involvement has made the conflict difficult to resolve. Now let's turn to India's approach to the Syrian conflict. India has maintained a stance of strategic autonomy, prioritizing its national interests over aligning with any particular power. India's relationship with Syria has been built on mutual respect for sovereignty and non-interference in domestic affairs. India has refrained from taking sides in the conflict, instead calling for a political resolution through dialogue and diplomacy. India has also been actively involved in providing humanitarian aid to Syria, especially through the United Nations and the other international organizations. India's consistent message has been to support peace and stability in Syria, while maintaining its close ties with Russia, a long-time ally and a key supporter of the Assad regime. India's neutral and pragmatic approach highlights its focus on strategic diplomacy, balancing relations with global powers while working towards peaceful resolutions and solutions. As we enter 2024, the war in Syria continues while Bashar al-Assad has regained control over much of the country. Areas like Idlib remain under rebel control, and parts of northern Syria are under the influence of Kurdish groups and Turkish forces. The country remains in ruins. Its economy is devastated, with inflation running rampant and unemployment soaring high. Rebuilding Syria will take decades, and the international community has been slow to help due to the ongoing political tensions and sanctions. Syria's future remains uncertain, and as long as foreign powers continue to intervene, a lasting peace seems elusive. To conclude, the Syrian crisis is a tragic tale of a nation caught in the crossfire of geopolitical struggles. It reminds us of the devastating effects of authoritarianism, the dangers of foreign intervention, and the importance of diplomacy. For India, Syria offers valuable lessons in maintaining a neutral stance and prioritizing strategic interests while promoting peace and dialogue. India's approach reflects the importance of strategic autonomy in a world where conflicts are increasingly complex and interconnected. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this exploration of the Syrian conflict has helped you understand its origins, the ongoing challenges, and the global implications. Until next time, stay informed and continue to think critically about the world around you.